Pericles and Athens by A.R. Byrne. After this, the Athenians garrisoned the passes of Granaia against any future threat from the Peloponnese. It had been a wonderful year, but the casualties in the aggregate were fairly serious. At the end of the campaigning season, the tribe Erechthais set up in proud sorrow its own separate war memorial, an unusual proceeding. The stone reeds of Erechthais, these died in war, in Cyprus, in Egypt, in Phoenicia, and at Heliais, at Aegina, and at Megara in the same year. The last words are spaced out for emphasis. There follows a list of 177 names, including 2 generals, a formidable total for one tribal regiment in a year with no serious reverse. Now, following the general prescription that gravestone isn't bigger than a hand that I believe in, you can build a war memorial over the mass grave and of the soldiers and whatnot, and just list out the names and in a legible manner. The following year saw for more serious fighting, for Sparta herself was now ready to take a hand. The Helot revolt was still dragging on, but the rebels had been driven back into their fastness in the great mountain amphitheater of Ithome, and she could spare troops for a campaign abroad. She was not yet formally at war with Athens. However, her generals were far too good soldiers to run their heads against a stone wall in the passes of Granaia. If Athens chose to support Argos in threatening Sparta's primacy in the Peloponnese, Sparta could give Athens something to think about elsewhere. A pretext was given by an invasion of the little state of Doris, west of Thermopylae, traditionally the mother country of the Spartans themselves, by its more powerful neighbors, the Phocians. One of their 3 chief villages had already fallen when the Dorians set a piteous appeal to their powerful colonist. Sparta assembled a force far larger than was necessary, 10,000 allies, with 1,500 Spartiates and Laconians, and sent it over by the sea under Nicomedes, son of Cleombrotus, uncle and guardian of the young king Pleistoanax. That this meant trouble was not lost on the Athenians. They sent 50 galleys to the Corinthian Gulf, enough to sink any fleet that Sparta's allies could still raise, and the first Athenian warships to be seen on the west coast of Greece, and they blocked the mountain passes on the Spartans' way home by Plataea and Megara. The scope of operations was widening. Phocas sued for peace, and Nicomedes sowed some more of his hand. He marched through Phocas into Boeotia and proceeded to restore Thebes in disgrace since her support of the Persians 20 years before to her old position as president of the Boeotian League. Thebes, her aristocracy compromised by the discredited Persian policy, seems to have been democratic at this time, though no doubt in a more agrarian and less thoroughgoing manner than Athens. But the Spartans could not help that. Reasons of the state demanded a strong Boeotia, and if now, as in the following century, the centralizing parties and Boeotia were democratic, so it must be, if Athens could find allies in pro-Persian Thessaly and Argos, then Sparta could do the same by Thebes. Moreover, there were men at Athens of the extreme reactionary party who were ready to open the gates to a Spartan army some dark night, if only they might thus get the government put back into their own hands and stop the building of the long walls, which meant to them the confirmation forever of the supremacy of the sailors and traders over landed interest, shearing off from an attack on the Athenians in the mountain passes. Nicomedes marched into the southeastern Boeotia, whence the way into Attica was easier and whence he threatened Euboea. But the Athenians, as in the days of Marathon, had determined not to stand passive and perhaps be betrayed, but themselves to take the offensive to some sanguine spirits. Indeed, it seemed that this enemy force was cut off from home, was lingering merely out of doubt what to do next, and that a bold attack might destroy it. They had still troops away in Egypt and at Aegina, but on Aegina Island the besieging army must now have been dug in and fortified blockading lines, which could be more lightly held, calling in allies from all sides, 1,000 Argives, with some men of their allied state, Kleonae, a force of the fine cavalry at Thessaly, islanders and Ionians of the League. Pericles and his colleagues raised an army 14,000 strong, counting, as was the usual, armored men only, and marched via Decelea to seek out the enemy. The mutual pursuit of piling up wealth distracts you until you reach the graves, right? And why do people think this? If your relatives can't do something in life, why, when they're dead, would you start praying to your relatives? Oh, do this for me. It's like, I wouldn't do that for you if I was alive. Why you think, literally, if the dead answered, people left and right would be getting things like, I wouldn't do that for you if you were alive. Why do you think I can do it for you when I'm dead? But there are entities that may speak on behalf of the dead, you would say. But as they camped in the territory of Tanagra, the nearest Boeotian city, a man came to the Athenian outposts, asking for speech with the generals. It was the exiled Cimon, asking to be allowed to fight as an ordinary citizen soldier in the ranks of his tribe. He must have been living as near as was permitted, probably in Euboea, and he had already sent in his offer to the council at Athens. It was the offer of an honest patriot, but to the Democrats it was embarrassing. How did Cimon and his friends stand with regard to the suspected reactionary conspiracy, as there was presumably no time to lay the matter on before the assembly? The council instructed the generals to refuse the offer, not without embarrassment in their turn. Pericles and his colleagues ordered Cimon out of the lines. Cimon left, with his parting message to his friends and supporters to play the man for Athens. Near Tanagra, his armies met, and there was a prolonged, savage, and bloody fighting. Pericles, who had already a reputation for gallantry, surpassed himself this day in reckless self-exposure. He, at least, had a bad conscience about the rebuffed Cimon. Cimon's supporters, too, fought with furious courage, mindful of their leader's message, and eager to wipe away the suspicion of disloyalty. Yet, in spite of all, Nicomedes' smaller and more homogeneous army, probably reinforced by Boeotians, on the whole held its own. Towards the evening, the combatants seemed to have separated, and then something happened which turned the scale. The Thessalians, feudal cavalry as they were, led by aristocrats sympathetic to Sparta, went over to the enemy and made a sudden and treacherous attack on the great mule train that carried the Athenian army's supplies. There was panic and massacre in the gathering dusk. Then the Athenians came to the rescue, and then the Peloponnesians, who had presumably concerted this move with the Thessalian chieftains, came up to intervene. By daylight things were still undecided, and the grim hammer and tongs battle was resumed, but the Athenians and their allies must have been drawn by the attack on the convoy onto the ground of their antagonists' choice. Fighting bravely and not in the rout, but with heavy losses, they were driven from the field. Over 100 of the friends of Cimon had died for Athens and for their leader's good name. The Argive and the Cleon contingents had been terribly cut up. Their casualty list, fragments of which have been found inscribed on stone among the war memorials of Athens, seems to have room for something like 400 names. There is no record of the total casualties, but the Peloponnesians, the Peloponnesians, I don't remember what the Greek is, had paid heavily too. Nicomedes did not attempt an invasion of Attica. He marched back to the western passes, unguarded now, passed through the Megarid, where his men relived their feelings by some destruction of the vines and the olive trees of the hapless Megarians, and dismissed his contingents to their homes. The Athenians, indomitable as ever, were already planning the next move. And I can't be the only one who thinks of Pantera's domination song. When words like unto domination come up, but the friends of Cimon had rehabilitated themselves with their blood, and Pericles himself now proposed a decree by which, as in the days of Xerxes' invasion, the ostracized leader, I don't know how to say that in Greek, but Xerxes, the ostracized leader was recalled from exile. By Cimon's influence with Sparta, it might be possible to put an end to hostilities, and a truce of 4 months was arranged, during which Cimon probably hoped to reach a lasting agreement. But the armistice said nothing about Boeotia, and just 62 days after a defeat at Tanagra, Mauronidez, with the whole available land army, marched again by the same road as before. At the village of Oin Afata, the vineyards, he met and overthrew the Boeotians in one of the most decisive victories of the Athenian arms. Tanagra fell, and had her fortifications razed, that she might no longer be a stronghold in Boeotia's eastern gate. And then Mauronidez marched through the country, where city after city surrendered, becoming an ally of Athens, and abjuring the newly restored hegemony of Thebes. It is this, it appears, though one must add, The evidence either way is extremely sketchy, involved relying on the local separatist parties, which were also conservative parties, led by the squires, strange allies for democratic Athens. But for Athens, as lately for Sparta, imperial policy seems to have made strange bedfellows. Thebes alone, still under her peasant party democracy, may have stood out of the Athenian alliance. Athenians may have hoped that the fear of Thebes would keep the lesser cities loyal, just as the fear of Argos had long kept Corinth and Epidauros staunch allies of Sparta. Now, in the Islamic world, the first month, the 7th month, the 11th month, and the 12th month are automatic truce months. And this is something that existed before Islam. Of course, this is a different system of truce. And we got to remember, see, this is what happens when there's not that, steadfastness. It's like, okay, people who believe in the cause and all that, let's see what they are doing. Let's make sure that everybody's together in this, like iron gates, Beyond Boeotia, the mountaineers of Phokis, smarting under their coercion by Sparta, joined the Athenian alliance, and the eastern Locrians on the coast, whose territory stretched up to Thermopylae, and were forced to do likewise, 100 of their leading men being taken as hostages. In one campaign, Athens had brought into her orbit the whole of central Greece. The winter's armistice with Sparta petered out without leading to a peace, or even being renewed. The Athenians, flushed with victory, were no doubt, as in many negotiations, indisposed to make any concessions. They finished the long walls in the same winter, 457 to 456 BCE, probably, and Athens was thus invulnerable to anything that Sparta could do, so long as Athens ruled the sea. The siege of Aegina was also drawing to a close. Starved out, the islanders surrendered, agreeing to the breaching of their walls and the confiscation of their fleet, and to joining the league with a heavy tribute of 30 talents a year. Athens also strengthened her hold on the Corinthian Gulf by the capture, just when it is uncertain, of the Locrian port of Naupactos near the Gulf's western narrows, and when the Messenian insurgents on the mountain Ithom at last came to terms with Sparta on the conditions that they should be allowed to depart from the Peloponnese. The Athenians settled them here, where they proved staunch, vigorous, and extremely useful allies. Sparta, relieved of this thorn in her flesh, might have been expected to resume the offensive, especially as a Persian agent. One Magabazos, well supplied with gold, had managed to slip across the Aegean with instructions to spare no expense in stirring up the Peloponnesians to invade Attica. He was now at Sparta, where his bakshish found ready acceptance. That's like Arabic for a bribe. Remember the story of E.A. Wallace Budge? The French kind of got him, and he thought he was done for in stealing antiquities sort of charge, and it was like, why am I free? Bakshish, alhamdulillah, bakshish. That was ready accepted, but no invasion resulted. Spartan manpower was still weak after the earthquake, and at 455 the Athenians gave her other things to think about. The rising Athenian general, Ptolemaides sailed right round the Peloponnese, harrying the coast of Laconia, and even captured and burned the Spartan naval port of Gathion, slipping away before the enemy could concentrate against him. Then passing up the west coast, he enrolled the islanders of Zakynthos. Okay. Z is not a common Greek letter. Zakynthos as allies, captured the Corinthian colony of Colchis, west of now Naupactos, made alliances with, or at least an impression on, the Acarnanians northwest of the Gulf and the Achaeans south of it, and ended by landing his troops and defeating the men of Sicyon, Corinth's west neighbor, hitherto out of reach of Athens' long arm. He then promptly laid up his ships at Pegae, where Athens certainly had a powerful squadron a little later, and marched his crews home by land. Athens was in a fair way to encircle Sparta and bottle her up in the southern Peloponnese, with Troezen, Argos, Zakynthos, Achaea, and Megara as allies. The next task was to overwhelm with the isthmus states around Corinth, Sparta's one remaining window to the north. Hence, the Athenian attacks on Sicyon, and Epidauros, aiming at weakening Corinth by knocking away the props, while Sparta, baffled and discredited, could be kept in check, it seemed, by Argos alone. Meanwhile, the home politics of Athens had not stood still. Pericles, who, after his early soldiering, was now becoming increasingly interested in home affairs, took a leading part in a series of measures which carried on and completed the development of the democracy. In the year after Oinothata, the chief archonships, hitherto still confined to knights, were thrown open by law to the next taxation class, the small holders. Zeugetae are owners of a yoke of oxen. And in practice, before many years had passed, even the poorest, officially classified as laborers, thetes, were accepted as candidates if they wished to stand, merely being put down officially as smallholders. But of greater real importance was the development always associated with Pericles' name of the principle of payment to citizens for doing the work of the state. That can be an important factor in all this. When this was introduced is uncertain. Counselors who gave up the best of their time for a whole year may well have been paid even earlier. Archons, if poor men were to hold these positions, also clearly had to be paid. But what was revolutionary in Pericles' reform was in particular the new payment for service on juries. See above, number 65. Well, kind of some payment does prevent bribes. None of Pericles' measures gets a worse press from the later Greek philosophical and literary tradition. By it, we are told, Pericles began the transformation of the virile men of Marathon. Why can't I say that word right? Into the dull-fed idlers, only interested in gossip and the latest news, hangers around the marketplace and law courts. listening greedily to demagogues. Instead, one seems to read between the lines of leaving public affairs to their betters, for whom such occupations were, of course, appropriate, since their work was done for them by the farm laborers and slaves. Gossip said that the idea originally came to Pericles from Damon, and that the measure was a party move, bribing the people with the public phones and Damon's repeated phrase, and thereby outbidding the lavish generosity of Cimon. And there may have been an element of truth in this, for with Cimon at home again, arguing for peace with Sparta, and regaining popularity by his personality, his use of his princely wealth, and the memory of his friend's loyal sacrifice at Tanagra, there was need for a radical leader not to stand still. But in fact, Pericles had better reasons than these for pressing on with such a policy. And